They say Rome feared no man, but one name made their empire tremble: Hannibal. Who was this African general who crossed mountains with elephants and brought Rome to its knees? Stay with us as we uncover the story they never wanted you to remember, and do well to subscribe to Forgotten Africa for more African history. Before swords clashed and elephants thundered across frozen mountains, there was a boy not born into peace, but into purpose. Hannibal Barca opened his eyes around 247 BCE in Carthage, a powerful empire on the North African coast, where the sun kissed the sea and ships painted the horizon with sails full of trade and ambition. Carthage was no dusty corner of the world, it was a jewel of the Mediterranean, a titan of commerce and war, born from Phoenician settlers and rooted deep in the soil of Africa. His family name, Barca, meant lightning, and it suited them well. They were warriors, leaders, and visionaries. His father, Hamilcar Barca, was already a fierce general, locked in bitter battle with Rome during the First Punic War. A man of fire and grit, Hamilcar did not believe in defeat, and he passed that fire to his son like a torch that must never go out. When Hannibal was just a child, his father led him to an altar and made him swear an oath, not with fancy words, but with the raw heat of vengeance. "Swear to me, Hannibal, that you will never be a friend to Rome." And the boy did. With eyes unblinking and heart already hardening, he pledged his life not just to fight, but to outsmart, outlast, and outlive Rome. That moment wasn't just a vow, it was the forging of a legend. Carthage, at that time, was more than a city. It was a powerful African empire, stretching across North Africa, southern Spain, and even parts of Sicily. Its streets echoed with many languages. Its markets bustled with gold, ivory, grain, and ideas. Its people were a blend of Phoenician blood and native African roots, proud of their culture, skilled in seafaring, and sharp in trade and strategy. But across the sea, Rome was rising, hungry, ruthless, and determined to dominate. The clash between these two titans was not just political, it was personal. For Hannibal, Rome was not a rival. Rome was a shadow that needed to be destroyed. And so, while other children played with stones, Hannibal studied maps. While others sang songs, he trained in the art of war. He learned languages, strategy, endurance, preparing for a war that had not yet begun. He was born a general before he ever led an army. Because this wasn't just the story of a man, it was the beginning of something unforgettable. A storm was forming in Africa, and his name was Hannibal. Carthage was not a village carved out of nothing, it was a rising force born from two powerful rivers of blood, Africa and Phoenicia. The Phoenicians, brilliant sailors from the Levant, modern-day Lebanon, had crossed the Mediterranean centuries earlier, building colonies along the African coast. And among those outposts, Carthage, meaning new city, grew not as a shadow of its motherland, but as something greater, stronger, wilder. Rooted deep in North African soil, it merged the merchant genius of the East with the spirit of Africa's heartland. The Carthaginians were not one people, they were many, a blend of Phoenician settlers, native Berber tribes, and Africans who had lived along the coasts and in the desert for generations. Their skin tones ranged from copper to ebony, their tongues carried many accents, but their hearts beat with one vision: to build an empire that could rival any on earth. Their city gleamed with red-roofed buildings, vast harbors, and towering walls. Their merchants sailed to Spain, Sicily, Egypt, and beyond, trading in gold, silver, salt, grain, olive oil, ivory, and fine textiles. Carthage wasn't just rich, it was strategic, perfectly positioned between Europe and Africa, with its eyes on the sea and its roots in the sand. But power attracts enemies like honey draws flies. Across the Mediterranean, Rome was growing. Ambitious, disciplined, and ever-expanding, the Romans looked at Carthage not as a neighbor, but as a threat, a mirror of what they feared and what they wanted to become. Two mighty empires, one African, one European, began circling each other like lions in the dust. The First Punic War had already scarred both sides. Rome had taken Sicily. Carthage, humiliated, was forced to rebuild. But rather than crumbling, Carthage grew more fierce. It turned its gaze to Spain, where new colonies and fresh gold would fuel its return. This was the world that shaped Hannibal, a place of fierce pride, rich culture, and endless ambition. A world where war was not just waged with swords, but with ships, coins, and cunning. A world where honor meant survival, and vengeance was a lesson passed from father to son. The world was watching. And Carthage was not done yet. While Rome nursed its pride and Carthage counted its scars, a young lion was sharpening his claws in silence. Hannibal did not grow up chasing shadows, he chased mastery. Under the sharp eyes of his father, Hannibal Barca, he was trained not to follow orders, but to shape fate. Before he had whiskers on his chin, he had learned how to ride, march, endure pain, and read the mind of an enemy. War was his classroom. Strategy was his alphabet. After Carthage's loss in the First Punic War, Hamilcar refused to drown in defeat. He sailed to Iberia, modern-day Spain, not to retreat, but to rebuild. There, Carthage found new lands, rich mines, and fierce tribes, and turned them into a fresh empire. It was there that young Hannibal cut his teeth. When Hamilcar died in battle, command passed briefly to Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal, and then, by the will of the army and the whisper of destiny, to Hannibal himself, at just 25 years old. Even at that age, soldiers followed him not out of duty, but out of trust. He was bold but not reckless, brilliant but not boastful. He spoke their languages, fought beside them, and led from the front. His mind was a map, his instincts a weapon. Under him, Carthage's influence spread across Iberia like fire racing through dry grass. But as Carthage rose again, Rome grew uneasy. A fragile peace hung between the two empires, but peace is only paper deep when pride and power lie beneath. Rome had its eyes on Saguntum, a city in Iberia that had aligned with Roman interests, even though it sat in Carthaginian territory. It was a challenge, subtle but sharp, a move to test Hannibal's patience. He didn't blink. In 219 BCE, Hannibal laid siege to Saguntum, capturing it after fierce resistance. To Rome, this was a provocation, a red line crossed. To Hannibal, it was a statement. Carthage would no longer bow. Rome demanded his surrender. Carthage's answer? Let the war begin. And so, the stage was set. What began as a fire in one Iberian city would soon become a storm that stretched from Africa to the gates of Rome. The lion was no longer a cub. Hannibal was ready to strike. War drums echoed across the seas, but Hannibal did not wait for battle to come to him, he carried it on his back, across continents and mountains. He knew Rome would expect him to sail, to meet them head-on through Sicily or the coast. But Hannibal was not bred for the obvious. He would not knock at Rome's front door, he would slip through the window, unseen, unthinkable, unstoppable. In spring of 218 BCE, Hannibal set out from Iberia with an army of nearly 90,000 men, cavalry, and a small herd of towering, trumpeting war elephants. His path would take him north, across rivers, through hostile tribes, and into the jaw of the Alps, a mountain range so brutal, even seasoned warriors trembled at its name. The Alps were not just cold, they were cruel. Blizzards howled like wolves. Slopes crumbled beneath feet. Men froze. Horses slipped. And the elephants, giant symbols of Carthaginian might, struggled to breathe in the thin, icy air. Yet Hannibal pressed forward, mile by mile, with iron in his eyes and fire in his chest. He rallied his troops not with promises, but with purpose. Rome lies beyond these peaks, he said, and we shall greet her on our terms. They faced avalanches, ambushes, and starvation. Some days, the snow swallowed men whole. On others, the cliffs cracked underfoot, sending warriors tumbling into white silence. By the time they descended into northern Italy, Hannibal had lost nearly half his army. But what he had left was enough to rewrite history. To the Romans, his arrival was unthinkable, like seeing a storm rise from beneath the earth. Their eyes widened as they realized Hannibal had crossed the Alps, something no one thought possible with an army, much less with elephants. He did not arrive as a guest. He came as a reckoning. The people of Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, watched in awe. Some tribes, tired of Roman control, joined Hannibal. Others simply fled. And Rome scrambled. Their generals had underestimated him. Their legions were scattered. Their confidence was shaken. From the snow-draped ridges of the Alps to the rolling fields of Italy, Hannibal's message was clear. I am here. And Rome will tremble. Hannibal didn't just fight battles, he composed them, like a musician conducting chaos. Where Roman generals saw war as brute strength, Hannibal saw it as a game of minds, a place where cleverness could defeat numbers, and the ground beneath your feet could become your sharpest weapon. His first symphony was Trebia. It was winter of 218 BCE, and the Roman consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus was eager to strike, overconfident and unaware of the trap ahead. Hannibal, calm as ever, used the river Trebia not as an obstacle but as bait. He sent in his cavalry to provoke Rome's pride, and it worked. The Roman army charged through icy waters in full armor, soaked and shivering, into what they thought was a fair fight. But Hannibal had hidden warriors in the fog, in the reeds, waiting. As the Romans struggled in the mud, Hannibal's forces closed in from all sides. It wasn't a battle, it was a lesson. The Romans were crushed, outmaneuvered, and humiliated. Hannibal had arrived. Next came Lake Trasimene, a battle not just of weapons, but of timing, terrain, and terror. In 217 BCE, Hannibal lured the Roman army under Gaius Flaminius into a narrow pass beside the lake. Mist covered the hills. Visibility was low. And in the silence of morning, as the Romans marched between mountains and water, Hannibal's troops descended like ghosts from the fog. From all sides, front, flank, and rear, the Romans were ambushed. They couldn't see. They couldn't organize. They couldn't breathe. It was the largest ambush in military history up to that point. Over 15,000 Roman soldiers died, many drowned trying to escape. Flaminius himself was cut down. Rome was stunned, it had never lost so blindly, so completely. But Hannibal wasn't done. In 216 BCE, he delivered his masterpiece, the Battle of Cannae. Facing a Roman force twice the size of his own, over 80,000 men, Hannibal didn't flinch. Instead, he formed his troops into a crescent shape, putting his weakest men in the center and his strongest on the sides. As expected, the Roman legions charged the center, believing they could break Hannibal's line. But Hannibal let them come. Step by step, his center bent backward, not broken, but drawing Rome deeper into the trap. Then, with perfect timing, his flanks curved inward, snapping shut like a jaw. From behind, his cavalry, having routed the Roman horsemen, came crashing back into the rear. Rome was surrounded. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to breathe. In a single day, nearly 50,000 Roman soldiers died. Blood soaked the fields. The ground was too soft to bury the dead. It was one of the most catastrophic defeats in Roman history and one of the greatest tactical victories ever recorded. Hannibal didn't just win battles. He redefined war. He was a ghost in the hills, a storm in the valleys, and a shadow behind every Roman soldier's fear. But even in victory, the road ahead remained steep. The gates of Rome were near, yet the city still stood. Rome had never known fear like this, not from Gauls, not from pirates, not from the gods. But Hannibal, the African general with fire in his blood and ice in his strategy, was not a passing threat. He was a shadow that hung over the Republic like a sword, and Rome, proud, mighty Rome, began to tremble. After Cannae, Rome was cracked but not crumbled. Senators grieved. Citizens wept. Entire legions had been swallowed in one afternoon. Towns defected. Allies grew silent. The heart of the Republic was bleeding. And still, Hannibal stood just miles from the gates, undefeated, the master of every battlefield he'd touched. But then, he didn't march on Rome. The question still echoes in history's hallways: why didn't he strike the final blow? The answer is layered, not weakness, not hesitation, but strategy, caution, and reality. Hannibal's army, though fierce, was wounded and far from home. He had marched across continents, bled through mountains, and lost thousands. He had no siege equipment, no reinforcements from Carthage, and no guarantee of support from the local Italian cities. Rome, even bruised, had walls, had reserves, and had a spirit that refused to die. So Hannibal chose patience. He aimed not to burn Rome down, but to break it from the inside out by shaking its alliances, draining its resources, and turning its friends into enemies. 4 years, he moved through Italy like a phantom, winning victories, forging new coalitions, but never launching a direct siege. And Rome changed. Realizing brute force would not stop him, they shifted strategy. No more rushing into battle. No more pride-driven charges. Under the guidance of generals like Fabius Maximus, Rome adopted a tactic that many mocked at the time: delay, harass, avoid open combat. They called Fabius the cunctator, the delayer. His plan was not to defeat Hannibal, but to starve him, to bleed him slow, to deny him the glory of another Cannae. Bit by bit, Rome turned from lion to serpent, coiling back into defense while building strength behind the scenes. Cities were fortified. Supplies were protected. Hannibal was isolated, forced to keep moving, unable to hold ground. He remained undefeated in battle, but gradually, his influence shrank. It wasn't a clash of swords now, it was a war of endurance, and time, Rome knew, was on their side. Hannibal had shaken the Republic, no doubt. He had humiliated their armies, shattered their pride, and walked where no enemy had walked in centuries. But even legends can be worn down not by might, but by denial. The storm still raged in Italy, but far across the sea, another wind was rising. Rome was preparing a counterstrike not in defense, but in Africa. While Hannibal haunted Italy, another Roman was rising quietly, a younger, sharper blade forged in the fire of loss. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio, and like Hannibal, he had seen Rome bleed. But where others lost heart, Scipio found resolve. He studied Hannibal's moves not with pride, but with precision. He understood that defeating a shadow in Italy would lead nowhere. So he chose a different battlefield, Africa itself. With boldness and brilliance, Scipio led a Roman counterattack across the sea, landing in North Africa and tearing through Carthaginian territory like a spark on dry grass. He allied with local tribes, including the Numidians, who had once supported Carthage but now turned their powerful cavalry against it. Carthage, caught off guard and desperate, had only one hope: bring Hannibal home. After nearly 15 years of roaming Italy, Hannibal, the man Rome feared like no other, was summoned back to defend his homeland. He obeyed, but his heart knew the danger. The Italy he had ravaged was not the same. The Rome he once shook was now disciplined, patient, and reborn under Scipio. The two giants, Hannibal and Scipio, met on the dry plains near Zama, in 202 BCE, under a sun that burned like judgment. This was no longer Hannibal's game of surprise. There were no narrow passes or hidden flanks. Here, it would be two minds, two armies, and one final outcome. Hannibal brought war elephants. Scipio brought preparation. The Romans opened paths in their lines, letting the elephants pass harmlessly through, then countered with sword and shield. The Numidian cavalry, once Hannibal's allies, now attacked his flanks, turning the tide. Still, Hannibal fought with grit, with brilliance, with every ounce of what remained. But time had turned the page. Carthage lost. The Battle of Zama was not just a military defeat, it was the end of Hannibal's war, and the beginning of Rome's unquestioned dominance over the Western world. For the first time, Hannibal faced something he had never truly known: defeat. Yet even in loss, his legend did not fade. He had faced Rome on its own soil, bent it but never broke it, and in doing so, became more than a man. He became a memory Rome could never silence. Defeated at Zama, Hannibal did not vanish into dust, he returned to Carthage, not as a warrior, but as a statesman. The sword was laid down, but the mind that had once encircled Roman legions now turned to reforming a broken city. Carthage, under Roman terms, was shackled with war debt. Its pride was bruised. Its walls still stood, but its spirit flickered. Hannibal took charge with fierce honesty, rooting out corruption, fixing tax burdens, and pushing back against the decay that had rotted from within. He was not just trying to save Carthage, he was trying to restore its dignity. But Rome watched him still. Even without an army, Hannibal was feared. His name alone could stir panic in the Senate halls. And so, under pressure, Carthage was forced to surrender him. With quiet rage, Hannibal fled into exile, not broken, but burning inside. He journeyed east, offering his brilliance to foreign kings who also saw Rome as a threat. In Syria, he advised Antiochus III. In Bithynia, he worked with King Prusia's eye, still weaving tactics, still haunting Roman plans from afar. But Rome's reach was long. Its spies followed him. Its influence closed in. And as the noose tightened, Hannibal made his final move not on a battlefield, but within himself. Rather than be handed over to Rome like a prisoner, he drank poison, slipping from the world on his own terms, sometime around 183 BCE. It is said his last words were bitter and bold. Let us now relieve the Romans of their fear, of a man so long hated. He died far from Carthage, far from the walls he defended, far from the land he once crossed with elephants and thunder. But in that silence, a legend was sealed. Today, many wonder, was Hannibal black? The answer begins not in race, but in geography and identity. Hannibal was born in Carthage, North Africa, a civilization rooted in Phoenician blood but grown in African soil. The Carthaginians were a mixed people, Semitic settlers, Berber tribes, and Africans who had lived along the coasts for generations. They were not European, not white in any modern racial sense. They were Afro-Phoenician, North African, and proud of it. Coins and busts from that era show features that today described as African or Afro-Mediterranean: dark skin, broad noses, curly or wavy hair. So, yes, Hannibal was a black African general in the sense that he was a non-European African, with dark skin, commanding armies against the might of Rome. But perhaps more importantly, he was a man of his land. A man who carried the wisdom of his people, the pain of his ancestors, and the thunder of Africa in his step. A man whose identity was never small enough to fit into someone else's label. Hannibal did not win the war, but his name lives longer than most victors.